everybody. My name is Amanda Vandenelzen, and today I am going to be showing you some generative AI basics. This course is for complete beginners. If you have never used a generative AI tool like Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, or Gemini before, you are in the right place. We're going to build some foundational knowledge and ideas of how to use these tools in your work today. The examples I'll give are intended for professional use, but I have no doubt that you're going to find use for them outside of work as well. Before we get started, you're probably wondering who I am and why you should listen to me rattle on about generative AI. So let me just share a little bit about who I am and what I do. My name is Amanda Vandenelzen. I am the founder and facilitator of Better Work Training. I partner with organizations that are struggling to find the ROI of enterprise tools that they purchased. Maybe they're paying for licenses in Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini, and they're not seeing the return they thought they would. Well, I step in and I train their functional teams on hyper-specific use cases that drive both adoption and value realization. Prior to launching Better Work Training, I worked as the learning and development manager of technical skills for one of the largest privately held businesses in Wisconsin. When ChatGPT rolled out, I built their training on generative AI from the ground up. They eventually launched Microsoft Copilot, so I got to build that too. And I also built out some of their automation training so that their teams could automate those functions and save some time on their work. That process, that role in corporate really taught me a lot about what did and didn't work when it came to utilizing AI tools to truly drive value in a working professional's day-to-day job. So today I'm bringing you that expertise, and we're going to go through the fundamentals of using generative AI both safely and effectively. Here is what we'll cover today. So first, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of LLMs. That is large language models, and really that's just a fancy way to say the tools that look and work like ChatGPT. We're going to talk about what they do, how they work, and some of the things we need to look out for in order to use them safely and ethically. Next, we're going to talk about how to build a prompt. We'll go over these things that I built called prompt building blocks, and I've got 10 of them for you. You can use those to get better results from your prompts. Then we're going to talk about the different ways that you can use LLMs, those different use cases. This is not going to be an exhaustive list by any means, but you'll leave with a solid sense of how you can leverage generative AI in a few different ways. Lastly, we're going to try some things together. You'll be building your own prompts during real-life demos, and when we're done, you should be able to safely and efficiently write basic prompts to use in your own daily work. And then at the end, as a thank you for coming along with me today, I do have a gift for you. I've got a PDF called 50 AI Prompts for Work Productivity. They're just really simple prompts that you can add your own context to help you continue to use generative AI in your work after today. So we're just going to jump right in the next section. I'll see you there. In this section, we are going to be talking about those large language models. How do they work? What are the risks of using them? And we're going to start out by talking about what tools are there even out there for us to use, and when should we be using each of those tools? So I know that you have probably seen a bunch of these names, but maybe haven't played around with them. ChatGPT being oftentimes the most recognizable model in this space, but we've also got tools like Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, Perplexity, or Claude. How do you even know where to start on these? Well, any of them, it's easy to log in, create an account using your email, and they do have free tiers of each of them. I would recommend logging into each of these and just playing around. We're going to be talking about these prompts and how to build them. try them in a couple different models and see what the differences are in how you get a response from each. Now, that being said, you'll never get the same response twice, even from the same tool, because it is creating a new message every time you get an output. But there are some things that are consistent in each of these tools. So let's walk through them and just kind of talk a little bit about when to use each one. First off, ChatGPT is what I would consider the OG. It's the first model that was made public for us to just play around in, write poems about our spouses if we decided to. But this is oftentimes on the cutting edge because they were one of the first. You'll oftentimes see OpenAI is the creator of ChatGPT, and you'll see them in the news a lot. Now, just because they're on the cutting edge doesn't mean that you can't find the things that ChatGPT does in these other models. Oftentimes, these models are also running the same things behind ChatGPT. In fact, Microsoft Copilot does use OpenAI's technology behind the scenes. Now, Microsoft Copilot focuses a little bit more heavily on security. Because Microsoft is so deeply ingrained in so many enterprise uses, you won't see those new functions rolling out quite as quickly with Microsoft Copilot because they are scrutinizing the security measures around it. They instead will roll things out more slowly and maybe a little bit more watered down to make sure that data is safe for their enterprise partners. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about security and making sure that that data isn't leaking. But do keep in mind, even with Microsoft Copilot, any of these models can and oftentimes do train on the data that you're putting in, and that can be a security risk. So, like I said, we'll touch a little bit more on that in the next part where we talk about outputs. But right now, keep in mind that Microsoft is security focused. Now, Google Gemini is one that I really spend a lot of time in because their free version is incredibly robust. Now, Google Gemini is really good for creating images. I really love their Nano Banana is the model that creates images. And it is, I would say, more advanced than a lot of the other models' image generators. Now, the other models are catching up quick. I'm not saying that you're going to have 12 fingers on one hand anymore in any of them, but the Nano Banana one is oftentimes the one you can get the most free images out of as well. So if you have not decided to pay for a model yet, that is absolutely okay. Play around in the free versions, and when you start hitting barriers in a model that you really like, that might be when you consider a paid license. But Google Gemini does a great job of giving you a lot of value in their free model. Now, Google Gemini also lives natively within the Chrome browser, which I know a lot of us use because of how reliable it is with many applications. So keep that in mind as well. Now, Perplexity is one that is a little bit more specialized than those other three, and it is really good for research. I like to use this to scour the web, come up with data points, especially if I'm putting together like proposals or research papers or trying to dig deeply into a business case. Perplexity works really well for that. And I do have a pro version of Perplexity, and what I really like about that is that I can switch between the different models in Perplexity. So without paying for a pro ChatGPT, a pro Gemini, a pro Claude license, I can access all of those different models within Perplexity. So if you do want to play around with the pro versions of these tools, Perplexity is a great way to do it under one licensing fee. And lastly, Claude. Claude is a really good one for some of the more technical work, and it excels in coding. Now, I am not a coder. I cannot speak directly to how good it is at coding because of that, but I will say I have played around with Claude and have found it to be a lot more technical and a lot more critical thinking than some of these other models. You might notice, especially if you're playing around with like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, I describe them a little bit like a golden retriever waiting for me to throw the stick again. It's very complimentary and very quick to tell you that you're doing a great job and that they love what you're doing. Claude isn't like that. Claude will tell you when you're maybe missing something. It'll help to keep you on track, and it will ask you some critical questions to get you thinking about ways that you might be missing things. Now, I encourage you to go through, play around in all of these. As we move forward here, you're going to be building your own prompts. Paste them into a couple of different models and see what happens, because you will see a difference between these different tools. Now that you know about the different tools and what they're good at, let's talk about inputs and outputs. What are inputs and outputs? You're probably asking. Well, each of these models functions by you inputting information. So that's what you're typing into the text box, or if you're using the microphone, you might be speaking to give it that information. So basically, anything that you're feeding it in your prompt would be considered an input. Now, the output is what happens when you hit enter. Those outputs aren't actually coming from a thinking being. The machine is using 3 different ways of analyzing and compiling data to give you that output. So let's talk about those 3 different ways that it's getting an output so you can understand some of the risks that come along with those outputs it's coming up with. The first thing that it does is it relies on training data. So that means you type in a prompt, it's going back in what it was trained on when it was created, or the information that it's getting from the web, and it's coming out with a response based on that. Now, the information that it's been trained on is massive. They call these large language models for a reason, and that's because oftentimes these models were trained on the entire contents of the internet, as well as a lot of public domain books, songs, poems, art pieces. It all got fed in on the front end so that it can reference it when you're asking questions or asking it to do something. The issue with that is that the internet is not an accurate representation of the world, and there is inherent bias. What does that mean? That means for you, as you're typing in an input, you need to be sure that the output that's coming out doesn't have a bias to it that would be unethical or unsafe for a party. For example, if I were to ask Google Gemini to create an image of a doctor, traditionally, doctors are oftentimes not seen as women. They're not seen as people in wheelchairs. So if I put in the prompt, give me a picture of a doctor, it's probably going to come out with a white male standing up, right? It's unlikely that I'm going to get out a picture of a woman in a wheelchair when I'm looking for a picture of a doctor. Not because those doctors don't exist, but because the internet doesn't see that very often. So as we're getting the information out, we need to be thinking, does this have bias to it? The second way that these outputs are created is through user inputs. So what does that mean? Well, as you're typing in your information, the context that you're going to be giving them in the prompt, it's learning what you're typing in. So it's not just based off of what it knew before it met you, but after you, it's become smarter. It's taken what you're typing in and adding it to the training data that it had initially. What does that mean? How is that risky? Well, when we're talking about proprietary information, maybe personally identifiable information, trade secrets, these are all things that if these models are training on that data, they could come out in other people's conversations. For example, right when ChatGPT started being used by companies, somebody went out to the free model from Samsung and they put meeting transcripts out there about a meeting about the semiconductors that they were building. And what they did was they asked the model to create meeting minutes for that meeting. Now, I'm sure that the meeting minutes were really good for the meeting that they were transcribing, but the information that was in there about semiconductors came out later in somebody else's conversation that had been leaked out before anybody was supposed to have seen it. We have to be really careful about the information that we're feeding in because there's definitely the opportunity for that to come back out if we're not careful. Now, the last way that it creates those outputs is by recognizing and continuing patterns in the first two data sets. So what do I mean by that? We're not any longer going back and pulling verbatim information from the training data or from the inputs of other users. If we're asking a bespoke question that doesn't have an answer that's readily available in those two places, it's going to come up with something new. Sometimes that's great, right? If we're asking it to write a poem in the style of Walt Whitman, it's going to look back and it's going to say, well, Walt Whitman has a pattern to the way he writes and the tone that he uses, and I'm able to recreate that really well. Sometimes that's not good. The risk here is that you don't always get what you expect. And I have a story to kind of show you why it's so important that you double check the information that you're getting out of these tools. One thing I didn't share with you when I talked about who I am and what I do is that I'm involved in the motorsports world. My husband and I run a professional short course off-road team, and a couple of years back, one of the biggest names in our sport was involved in a very bad wreck at the track. His name is Johnny, and he was airlifted from the track, brought to the nearest big city, and was treated for the injuries that he had sustained at the track while we were there. Now, as you can imagine, everybody was pretty shook up about this, and the next morning, I was sitting next to his brother in the grandstands at the driver's meeting, and he turned to me and he said, "Amanda, my phone has been ringing off the hook all morning." Said, "Yeah, I could imagine that was a nasty wreck." And he said, "It's not just that, it's this." And he showed me his phone, and on the phone there was an article from some news source I've never heard of before. And at the end of the article, it said, "The family is expected to release Johnny's obituary." That one hit hard. What happened here? Well, Johnny wasn't dead, first off. He was in the hospital recovering, injured, but recovering. But this disreputable news source had caught wind of this accident, typed in the details into some sort of model, ChatGPT or otherwise, and gotten out an article and published it as is. Now, as we're thinking about patterns and how these outputs come from patterns, oftentimes nasty motorsports wrecks end with the family is expecting to release the obituary, right? This one wasn't like that, but nobody had read through that article or verified the details to make sure that that was accurate. So think about that in your work. If you're not double checking the outputs that are coming out of these tools, what kind of misinformation could you be missing? What if that was forecasting information? Or what if that was a publication that your company was putting out that might be mistruthful or just completely fabricated? It is so important that we go through and check for these hallucinations and make sure that we're putting our own voice and our own truths into the work that we're releasing. This is the last of our introduction, and moving forward from here, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to use these tools hands-on, so I hope you're ready for that. All of the value you'll ever get out of an LLM like Copilot or ChatGPT comes in the form of an output. We've talked about where the outputs come from, but now it's time to actually understand how to craft inputs that get results. Many people try to use a generative AI tool for the first time. They put in a cruddy prompt, they get a cruddy response, and they decide the tool isn't all it's hyped up to be. Well, it's really not the fault of the tool. It's a fault of not writing a great prompt in the first place. This is a classic case of garbage in, garbage out. So I am going to make sure you're not putting garbage in by giving you what I'm going to call prompt blocks. These are different parts of a prompt with details about your unique situation that you can put together to get the best possible input and therefore the best possible output. You probably won't use all of these blocks in the same prompt, but if you're not getting the response you're looking for, it might be because you're missing one of these pieces. So let's just walk through these one at a time. I'll explain what each one of them means, and then I'll give you an example of what that might look like in the prompt using that block as well. So the first one is a goal. This is really explaining, like, what do you want in the output? Do you want an email? Do you want feedback? Maybe you need instructions or a list of ideas. The goal is what you're trying to get out of the LLM in the situation that you're in. And here's an example. Simply draft a project kickoff email. So you're just telling it what to do. The next piece is context. This sounds really broad because it's super specific to what you've got going on in your work. The example I have here says we're switching from Excel to a new CRM next month, but it really could be anything. It could be my manager asked me to pick out a new desk chair for the office, or I was talking with someone on supply chain management team and I realized that I have no idea what they actually do. This is telling the model why you're doing whatever the goal is. The next one is persona. A persona is just a role that you'd like the AI to take on while you're working on this goal. And if I had to think of it any way, I'd think of it this way. If you had access to anyone on the planet, who would have the best answer or the best guidance for you in this situation? For example, if you're stuck on a budget, ask the CFO. If you're crafting a lesson plan, bring in a tenured teacher. Trying to figure out how to tiptoe around a sensitive employee conversation, talk to an HR professional. Just tell the AI who to be, and it'll drastically change the way it approaches the response. So in this example, we're going to say, act as an expert project manager. Just give it the role. The next piece is audience. Sometimes the output is just for you, like when you're reading a professional development book and you're trying to figure out how to apply it in your role. In that event, just tell it who you are and what you do. Sometimes, though, the output is meant for somebody else. For example, this email will be sent to a team of 10 stressed out sales reps. You might be putting together a presentation for the board, so give the AI instructions that say that. And if you have any insights on specific personalities or things they'll be looking for, you can include that here too. Just tell it who is that output meant for, so it can tailor the message to that audience. The next piece is constraints. If you have specific guidelines or preferences, you can also include these constraints for the AI to follow. So think about it like this. Maybe you're putting together a sales proposal, but you know the client only has a set budget of $10,000. Instead of just put together a proposal for this customer where it might put together a proposal for a really big project, tell it that you're staying within that budget. And then it will rail that back in and make sure that your proposal reflects the budget. You might say something like, make sure the message is under 150 words. No corporate speak if we're writing that email that we've been building here. Or perhaps you're doing a presentation, but you'll only have 15 minutes. You can make sure that AI knows how much time you have so you don't run over or stop too soon. Sometimes you're asking AI to do a lot at once, and that's okay, but it works better if you ask it to go through steps. So, for example, you might be telling it that you're going to paste in an email from somebody else. Then you'll paste in a response that came through on that thread, and then you want it to respond with a new reply for the entire thread. That can be 3 different steps in the same thread. As long as you tell it what steps you're taking, it'll follow along. Or in this example, you'll see that we're asking it to do a few things all at the same time. So we're going to give it the steps it needs to do that correctly. The next piece is examples. One of the biggest challenges for using AI is that sometimes it sounds and feels like AI instead of sounding and feeling like us or the persona that we gave it. If you have some examples, you can paste or attach them in here. You can have it mimic your writing style. You can copy directional trends in data or thoughtfully respond like a specific meeting attendee from a transcript. So if you give it a persona of Susan from accounting, then attach a transcript from a meeting in which Susan was very vocal, you'll have a better shot at replicating Susan's reaction to your idea for the next meeting. Here's an example here. I'm pasting a prior email here as an example of my writing style. A reference and an example could be really similar, but there are instances where you might attach or paste information without asking AI to mimic it. You might attach a spreadsheet and ask it to reference the data there before recommending a budgetary limit. Or you could paste in all of your customer reviews on your product and ask what the overall user sentiment is. You might even link out to a website and ask the AI to use an article or a web page as the basis for the information in its response. All of these are ways to provide more context to the tool so you can get a stronger response. Here is just how you would include that in your prompt. I've attached meeting notes detailing the scope of the change. And then you just attach that file in. We've already given AI the direction of what we want it to do, but an output format is how we can give it precise instructions of how we want that output to look. We could specify that we want a content calendar, maybe in the form of a table where the columns are days and the rows are weeks. We could say we want a narrative with a strong hook and a call to action for a piece of copy we're writing. Perhaps we want the output so we can paste it into Excel easily, or a list of email addresses we can paste into Outlook really easily. We might say, write an email draft with bold subject line and bullet points. By telling the tool exactly what you want, you won't be surprised with its response in the long run. Lastly, you can tell AI what kind of a tone you'd like it to use. So perhaps you're cold calling a stranger on a sales call and you want to sound friendly, not pushy. Tell it that. Or maybe you're writing copy for a website and you need it to sound like you have an authority in the space. I'm pretty bad about sounding too direct in emails, so I tell it all the time to soften my message and make it sound more friendly. In this instance, we might say, ensure the messaging is both reassuring and direct. Those are the prompt blocks. And when we put those blocks all together, you can really write some great prompts. Feel free to play around with it a bit and see what you get. Now that you have the building blocks of a great prompt, it's time to talk about when you can actually use them. AI can serve us in a whole lot of different ways, and we're going to walk through four of them to get you off to a good start. Most people start here using generative AI to write for them. Now, a lot of folks will start with something small or silly. I oftentimes see write a poem about my spouse, and then you tell them their name and a couple of things about them. It comes back with a funny or a cute poem. But that doesn't really give us value in the work that we're doing. So instead of doing something like that, I'm going to encourage you to do this. Think about something you actually need to write. What is on your to-do list right now? Is it an email, a document, a presentation outline? That thing. Keep that in your mind. Go back to the prompt blocks that we were already talking about. Pick out some key pieces of information and use that to go out and play around in your generative AI tools. Then you can try something maybe a little bit more like this. I've got act as an executive assistant. There's our persona. Draft a 3-sentence email declining a vendor's request for a meeting this quarter. So we have our goal. We've also got our output format in the 3-sentence constraints there. Declining a vendor's request is the context that we're giving it. And then also we've got the tone. Keep the tone professional but firm so they don't follow up again. As you're writing your prompts, just piece together those pieces of information. You don't have to use all of the prompt blocks, but see how something like this will bring back a better response than respond to an email saying no. And on that note, I do want to say, I love using AI to say no. It's a lot more confident and kind than whatever I would write out. Now, writing is great with AI, but most people, they stop here. They just consistently use generative AI to write things for them. And, it's really good at that, but it can do so much more for us. For example, have you ever considered using it as a researcher? It used to be that AI tools didn't have access to the internet. Not that long ago, ChatGPT was only trained through data from 2021 and before that. But that's different now. You can ask most of these models to go out to the internet and do specific research for you, and you'll get some decent results back, including many of them cite their sources for you. And that citing is really important because remember, these tools make stuff up. So you don't want to just take what it's giving you as verbatim and ship it off, but you're able to look through those sources, make sure it's giving you good information, and go from there. Now, it is a little bit of work to go through and validate those things, but think about the difference between doing that and starting from scratch or Googling some generic terms and having to dig through everything. Here's an example of a prompt using LLMs as a researcher. I'm meeting with a client in the vertical farming industry. Browse the web to find their top 3 market challenges and provide the results in a 1-page bulleted cheat sheet. I barely know what vertical farming even is. So if I was meeting with a client in this industry, it would take me a long time to even get to a baseline understanding of what that is. And then to be able to put together their market challenges is going to take me a long time. This will get me a really solid start in doing that research, and it may even help me understand a little bit more about what my client does than if I would have done it on my own. And I want to point out too, research doesn't always have to be web-based. Sometimes you're doing your own research when you're talking to it about how someone else thinks or how someone else would respond. For example, how would a CEO respond to this idea is still doing research. What about when you don't understand a concept or you want to learn to do something new? Well, AI makes a great teacher. The context you give it will help shape how it teaches you. So you might say something like, explain how the Excel X lookup function works. I'm a total beginner, so use a simple analogy to explain how it finds data. Notice you're giving the goal, the audience, and the output format that's going to best help you learn. Now, this could also look something like, I'm trying to build out a website in Shopify, but I've never used this tool before. I've never coded anything before. Can you explain what a product is and how that differs from a category? Or maybe even, I heard the book, The AI Driven Leader, is a good read, but I haven't made time to read it yet. As a leader of the finance team, can you give me the 5 biggest takeaways that would apply to my role from this book? Now, lastly, and my favorite personal use of this AI tool is using it as a thought partner. How many times have you stared at a project or a computer screen knowing you should be making progress, but you're just completely stuck or you're suffering from mush brain? AI is the best thing I've found to treat mush brain. I'm a chronic sufferer, as it can really help you ideate, strategize, refine, and move past blocks. Just imagine if you didn't have to interrupt your boss or your colleague with a request like this. Act as a skeptical project manager, review my attached project plan, and identify 3 potential timeline risks I might have missed. And this is really just one example of many of how you can use these tools as a thought partner. One of my favorites is I was in a meeting with a CFO and his leadership team, and we were working on a talent strategy presentation that we were going to present to the board the next week. They used Microsoft Teams to record the meeting, and then there was the transcription. And after the meeting, I asked Microsoft Copilot to look at the transcription, and I asked it, what might the CEO ask about this presentation that we haven't addressed yet? And the questions it came back with stopped everyone in their tracks. And honestly, it resulted in some pretty major tweaks to how we were presenting that strategy to the board. The end of the story, the board was pleased with the presentation and approved the strategy. But honestly, that was thanks in part to Copilot and the thought leadership we got from that. Like I said at the beginning, this isn't a comprehensive list, but hopefully it's got your brain working to identify some of the use cases that you could put prompts together for that'll actually provide value in your work. In the next section, we're going to finally put what you learned into use, and we're going to build some prompts for your own real-time work.
All right, this is the fun part. We are going to do some hands-on practice, building prompts, and showing what these generative AI tools can actually do. We're going to go off script, off presentation, and we're just going to work together in the tools. We're going to start out with writing new things, wordsmithing, things like emails and communications. Then we're going to move to research and critical thinking by using these tools. And then, as a bonus, we are going to look at the multimodal functions. We're going to be uploading files and images and seeing what these tools can do with those. The first thing we need to do is pick a model to work in. At the beginning, we kind of talked about which models are good at which things, but realistically, I encourage you to play around in all of them. Use some of the prompts that we build here today and put them into each of the different tools. See how those tools respond, see what they're good at, see what they're not that great at, see how the tone changes between them. I'm going to use Copilot today because that's one that most professionals have available if they're using the Microsoft Suite at work. So because of that, I'm going to show that to you here. I am using the free version, and everything that we do together today can be done in the free version. But remember, we talked about safety in those free versions, and do not put confidential information or proprietary data into these tools. That being said, as long as everything is washed of anything sensitive, feel free to play around in these free tools. So I have Copilot up here now. I'm going to close the sidebar so we've got a little bit more space to look at it. And we're just going to start out with something simple. That is writing an email. I have a prompt put together here already. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to pretend like I'm working with the IT team on some change management. Our IT team is introducing a new intake process at our organization, which involves submitting a form at this link. Don't go to that link. It's fake. I made it up. We are moving to this process because we noticed in surveys that projects were not being completed timely, and some high impact projects were taking a back seat to lower impact IT work. Now you'll notice that whole first section is just context. I haven't even told the tool what I want it to do yet. That's what comes next. Write an internal email announcement to managers about this new process, including what they can do to drive adoption within their teams. So that has a couple different blocks of those prompting blocks that we talked about. First off, we gave it an audience. We said, write an internal email. So we know we're looking at our own employees, and we're saying that's to managers across our business. Then we gave it the goal. We want it to write an email. That's what we want it to do. And then I also gave it some of those steps. I said, including what they can do to drive adoption within their team. So that's going to help to form that output. Now, when I send this through, what it's doing, it's reading through this prompt, and it's going to come up with a communication based off of the information that I gave it. Here we go. All right. So we can see that it even formatted it as an email for me. If I clicked on open an email, that'd pop up in my Outlook. But I've got this notification going out to my managers. And how did it phrase it for my managers? Well, we can tell that it is telling them they need to direct their team members to use the intake form for all IT needs. So it's definitely targeting managers because it's showing them how to lead their own teams. And it's got some information about why this is happening, what they need to do, and how to drive adoption within their group. That's exactly what I asked it to do. Now, I can copy that down here. I've got a little copy email body. I can always copy the full message here too, and I'm going to do that just to show you what the difference is. I'll paste it here so you can see, but that is taking everything outside of this bucket. And so if I want what Copilot is telling me, I can copy it that way. If I want what Copilot has in this bubble to put in my email, that's when I would use that other copy button. I don't want any of those just yet because we also need to talk to a different audience. So we're working within this thread already, and it's already going to know the context that I gave it if I keep typing into this same bubble down at the bottom. So instead of spelling out all of the context again, all I have to do is say, hey, let's change the audience. Let's write a different version. So I wrote to the managers already, but I still need to make everybody else aware of the change that we're doing. I can tell it, can you also write an email to all non-managers with this announcement? And it's going to take the email that it already put together. It's going to reframe it for a new audience. And here we go. Our new draft, again, it'll open an email or we can copy it down at the bottom. But you can see here, instead of telling us that we need to talk to our teams, now it's looking at us as individual contributors who need to adopt this change instead. Well, this is great. What if, though, we have people who don't speak English that need to know this. This is one of my favorite uses for wordsmithing in these generative AI tools. Remember, we talked about the fact that this is trained on the entire contents of the internet? Well, guess what? That means also languages outside of English. Now, what's really cool about this is prior to generative AI coming out, these tools for translation were word for word, meaning that sometimes the meaning was lost because the words directly translated didn't carry the same meaning. Now I can go into generative AI tools like Copilot, ChatGPT, and otherwise and say, can you please translate this to Spanish, maintaining the original tone and meaning? And what's great is it's going to spit out, instead of a word for word translation, it's actually going to get that message translated instead. Now, I don't speak very good English. No, I don't speak very good Spanish, but I can tell that this is along the same lines as what we had in our original email out to our non-managers. All right. What if we changed our audience again? And instead of looking internally and sharing this message as a change management tool, what if we shared this externally on LinkedIn? And this is instead focusing on how we're an innovator and this new process is pushing our business forward. This is meant more to attract new talent and to highlight our organization in a marketing capacity as an innovator in this space. So now I'm telling it who my audience is external on LinkedIn. I'm asking it to write a LinkedIn post in English. I don't want it in Spanish this time. And I want to highlight the innovation behind this new process. I'm telling it that I want to use a strong hook and an engaging narrative. So instead of this being informative, I want it to be engaging and more like a story. When I send this through, I'll get a LinkedIn post here. We can see we've got that strong hook on the front end. What if the bottleneck isn't the work, but the way the work arrives? I'd probably click on that. And then we've got a narrative. Here's the story behind what we're doing. And the impact is already clear. We're all innovative. This is great, right? So we can copy this. Again, if we copy this, it's going to take all of the commentary here from Copilot as well. So we can copy it, but we need to go back and revise it before we put that out into our LinkedIn post. So this is a couple of ways that we can use these tools to wordsmith. And honestly, I think this is where most professionals stop. They find the value in writing an email or creating content, and they fail to recognize that these tools can do a lot more and provide a lot more value than just writing some things for us. So before we move on, we are going to start a new chat because we don't need it to follow that thread anymore. But in the next scenario, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can do some research and some critical thinking with the use of Copilot or these other generative AI tools as a thought partner. We've used generative AI to create a text output, whether we're writing emails or other communications, but now we're going to flip the script. We're going to use generative AI to help us think differently. We're going to do that with research, with brainstorming, with critical thinking, and we can do all of those things just by utilizing those same prompt blocks, but in a different way. Let's take the first prompt as an example. So I've got a prompt here that says, our company sells SaaS, that's software as a service, B2B, so business to business, and is looking at expanding into offering marketing SaaS solutions. What are some of the biggest challenges companies face when they have no marketing team or undersized marketing teams? So we've got our context in here on why we're doing the thing we're doing, but the goal of this is really just to understand the concept of how do I move from this piece to this piece as I'm introducing a new product or service. So when I send that through here, Instead of it just creating things, you'll notice it popped up and it said it right in here, searching the web. That's great. That's looking out at some external benchmarking. And when I look through here, I can see where it's pulling that information from in the little citations that it has here. When I click on that, it'll even open it up to the page that it's referencing, and I can read through the source as well. So here it's telling me a couple of ways that a marketing solution could create real value for teams that don't have a strong marketing function in their organization. So these are some of the struggles that they have: low or inconsistent brand awareness, missed growth opportunities, unclear or inconsistent messaging, so on and so forth. I've got a long list of some of those challenges. These are now places where I can focus on in my solution. So it's helping me think through that differently, not just giving me something I can copy and paste and send off somewhere. Now, I already had it search the web, and I could dig through these to see if there's any cool points of data. But what if I would really like to just tie some data in and identify those 5 biggest challenges? This isn't exactly Googling. It's taking the intent of what I'm doing and it's going out and finding information based off of that intent, not based off of keywords. So this is very different than typing this into Google prior to Google having an AI mode. So I'm finding out here, lead generation is the number one pain point that marketers say is their top challenge. We've got data fragmentation makes decision-making nearly impossible, right? So we've got some pretty high priority pain points that are being identified. And then we have the data to back it up. So here it says 63% of marketers say generating traffic and leads is their top challenge. And then I have that source to go out to and read through where it came from. So now I have some data to back up the decisions that I'm making as I'm doing my product swap. The next prompt I've got put together here for you is I'm going to be approaching one of our customers who is already working with us using our legal software as a service. What are some objections they may have to working with us on marketing as well? And how can I navigate those conversations? So this, again, we're not creating text. This is helping me think through, and now it's helping me anticipate objections on the sales side. So when I send this through, what I'm really asking for is it to predict how a certain persona is going to react in a situation. So think about how that might be helpful in your work. At what points in time are you interacting with somebody that you're not really sure how they're going to respond? Or you know that they're going to push back, but you're not really sure how. Doing something like this will help you prepare for that pushback and overcome the objections. That way, you know you're already deep-seated in data and prepared to have that conversation without stumbling on your words. So here are some of the likely objections they say that our existing client is already going to have. This is what it really means, and this is how I can navigate that conversation. So you can see how this would be really powerful when I'm introducing a new product or service into my lineup. We've got a bunch of those here. All right, the last thing I've got lined up here is helping me brainstorm. So I've got help me think of some strategies to introduce this new software as a service to our market. So I went from I have this idea to now I have the idea, I've got the data to back it up, I understand my customers more, and I know how to introduce this to the market and overcome the objections that may exist there. And here I've got a step-by-step how I can introduce this to my market, and frankly, I think this would really give me some solid foundational steps to get this launched. The next thing we're going to look at is that we've done the wordsmithing, we've done the critical thinking, the brainstorming, the researching. Did you know that we can also use files, images, spreadsheets, documents, and analyze what is in those multimodal functions? That's going to be what we show you in the next one. We're going to start out by starting a new chat and starting fresh in the next video.
We are going to move to a new example. So I'm just going to open my sidebar, new chat. I'll get that out of the way. And we're going to look at some of the multimodal capabilities of these tools. Now, like I said before, I'm working in Copilot. This will look a little bit different in each of the different tools, but it's all really similar. And I have no doubt you'll be able to follow along whether you are in ChatGPT, Google Gemini, any of those other tools. One thing to keep in mind is that some of those tools do run out of free usage pretty quickly when we're uploading files. So in that instance, especially like ChatGPT has some pretty strict guidelines on what you can and cannot upload after you've uploaded one thing already. So keep that in mind, but we're going to keep going in Copilot. Feel free to follow along. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how these tools can get information from an image. So this is the image I'm going to attach here. You can see it's all hand drawn. There's handwriting. We're pretending this is a whiteboard with a process for an expense approval. Now, there's no typed out text, and I do want to point that out because we are asking it to transcribe all the text and arrows into a clean, sequential, and formatted list of steps so I can create a follow-up document. Now, I can hit this plus button, and there are a lot of different things that I can do in these tools. I'm sure if you're in something other than Copilot, you'll see a different set of things we can attach or do in these different models. We're not going to go through most of these. Feel free to explore them. They're just not going to fit the foundational stuff we're going over today. But what we are going to do is add images or files, and that will pop open our File Explorer. Now I'm also going to show you, I have my File Explorer up on my other screen, and I'm just going to drag and drop the file, and I can do that this way as well. So that's going to make sure you don't have to look at my messy files. But it's also a great way, if you have this all pulled up somewhere else, you don't have to dig through and find it in here. Now, if you have an enterprise version of Copilot, you can also hit the / and that will start to pull up your files as well. I'm not working in the enterprise version right now, so I have to either upload through the plus button or drag and drop a document. Now, when I send this through, it is looking both at the text that I included and at the image that I included. And I can click on that image to see what it was. So when I scroll back, I know what I was working with, and I can download it if I need to. But it's giving me my response here. And you can see that it did follow my flow chart. It put everything in order. It's got information in here that was handwritten. So it's reading that information and transcribing that all out in order. Now, what I said I was going to do with this, I said I was going to have a follow-up, right? So I can continue in this thread just like I did in the others, and I'm going to just ask it to draft that follow-up. And I'm picking a very specific persona from within my process here. So you can see my department heads, they have a review process here. And I'm asking it to draft a follow-up for them specifically that explains the process and their role in it. So again, it's taking that information from the image and it's breaking that down into a communication that I can send to my department heads. Here I've got my whole communication. Now, I do want to show you that you can share this in a couple of different ways. Up until now, we've just kind of been highlighting and copying and pasting. This is pretty long and it might be a little clunky to do that. So I'm going to show you down here at the bottom, you can copy message. And when you copy that, I'll just paste it here so you can see the whole thing. You do need to be aware that it's pulling the entire message, not just the part that it's intending that you send to your audience. I've got its little commentary at the bottom here. I've got its commentary up at the top. Those are things I'll probably want to remove before I send this off. Now I've got this and I'm ready to send that out. Let's say that I need to now present this to our executive team. So my prompt here is that I have a project update document. We've been working on building this out, and it's outlining all the details. Now it's not just this brainstorm idea anymore on a whiteboard. Now we've got this whole PDF, and it's got all of the details about the whole project. And I need to present how this project is going to our executive team. This is a pretty decent project. I didn't write this. I got it from somebody else, but I'm responsible for presenting it. I want to make sure that I'm pulling out the right information from this PDF to present to our executives. So I am going to, again, just drag and drop that document over. I can see here I've got that PDF attached, and I'm asking it to give me 3 talking points from this document that will best highlight the value of the project. I've given it my audience and I've told it what I need it to do. Now, again, it is going through this and it's reading through my whole PDF, and very quickly I have the bullet points or the talking points that I need to bring forward to my executive leadership team. And you'll notice it's even pulling out some of the data as well, which is a huge point for our executive leadership team. So I've got my 3 talking points and I'm able to do with that what I need to. So we've done an image, we've done a PDF, but what about data? Now, I have this spreadsheet. Let's say we rolled out this project. We've got all of our teams that are currently going through this new process, and I have the data of what they submitted before, what they had approved before, and what was pending before the project. And I have almost 50 lines of data here, so it might take me a little while to go through line by line and figure out who is struggling with this. Now I've got what was submitted, approved, and pending after the rollout as well. So I have a contrast from before and after for each of these teams. Now what I'm going to do is drag that spreadsheet over. Again, you can add that with the little plus button if you need to. And I'm going to ask it conversationally to help me find some trends. And the trend I'm looking for is if there are any teams that aren't adjusting well to the process change. You'll notice I didn't ask it, are there any that have this number before and this number after? Or do you see a trend where this is trending upwards or downwards? I didn't say that. Conversationally, I talked to it like I would talk to a person. And I said, this is just what I'm trying to figure out. Here's the data that I have. Are there any teams that I should follow up with to ensure they understand the process? When I send this through, it's looking through my data. It's doing a little bit of math. And I have a couple of teams that it says, ooh, these guys are not doing so great. So the biggest red flag they said is in my contract management team because their pending spend is actually increased while every other team's has decreased. The same thing in facilities management. I'm also seeing an increase when everybody else is decreasing. Now it's showing that I have a couple that are a small scale increase. These are the ones that they are recommending that I check in with first. Everybody else is landing in a much smaller pending range, healthy, consistent pattern. Now remember we talked about it's really good at finding these patterns. Data is a great place for us to point this, but keep in mind it does have those token limits and that applies to our data as well. So it can go through a lot more data than I can, but it can't go through endless data without losing sight of what it looked at first. So these are some really cool ways that we can use these tools. I would highly recommend putting some files in here, some images, play with data in it, but keep in mind, these are all made up things that I have shown you. If you're using real data, make sure that you're in a process or in a program that it's not going to be training off of that data if it's sensitive. Wow, we have covered a lot in our time together today. We just got finished up practicing with some prompts. Before that, we talked about how we can use these prompts in different ways and different use cases. We talked about how to build a prompt with some of our prompt pieces, those building blocks that make a great prompt by providing a lot of context and information so we don't get stuck in a garbage in, garbage out loop. And we've also talked about these large language models, how they work, what they do, what some of those risks are, and how we can navigate them safely. I hope you learned so much today that you're able to take back to your work. And to make sure that you feel comfy with some of those prompts, I do have a free resource for you here. It's called the 50 AI Prompts for Work Productivity. It's just a PDF guide. You can scan the QR code and download for free. It's got a lot of very simple prompts in it. You'll notice that those prompt building blocks are things that you'll want to tack on and add into these prompts to make them your own and make them tailored to the work that you're doing. Those prompts are going to help you walk away today and be able to continuously apply what you learned today in your work. If you enjoyed today's session, I do have the opportunity here to connect with me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Amanda Vandenelzen. I'm with Better Work Training, and you can visit my website here, betterworktraining.com, or the Academy on that page, where there are more free resources, more things to help you use AI in your day-to-day work. And again, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm always sharing new productivity prompts and ways to think about AI a little bit differently in your work. I'm so grateful that you chose to spend your time with me today, and I look forward to talking more in the future.